I want to focus this transmission exclusively on that. It's caused Andy Burnham some angst, but before we get to Andy Burnham and the angst we've caused him, I want to show you, confirm with you, how not just I, but the mainstream media, the council-funded mainstream media, saw the outcome of the vote. This is just a couple of days after the council meeting was on the 6th, and this was published on the 8th in the Oldham Times by Kent Lawler. News reporter. Request to move Oldham from places for everyone scheme to be made. The council, here it is, you can see it. The council must request the government for Oldham to be removed from a major Greater Manchester housing plan after an extremely tight vote at a council meeting. There you go. The council must request the government for Oldham to be removed from a major Greater Manchester housing plan after an extremely tight vote at a council meeting. On Wednesday, November the 6th, the full council met and discussed the motion of revoking the borough from the Places for Everyone (PFE) plan. The PFE scheme, first proposed in 2016, would see thousands of new homes built across 9 of the city region's 10 boroughs over the next decade. Stockport withdrew from the plans back in December 2020. The plan is set to define a new Greenbelt boundary for Greater Manchester amid a nationwide undersupply in housing and has proved controversial. Many in Oldham feel that it would lead to the destruction of the Greenbelt. But now, the council will have to formally request the government to remove the borough from the scheme. During the meeting, a motion was put forward to make the formal request for Oldham to be revoked from PFE. Addressing the meeting, Councillor Elaine Taylor, Cabinet Member for Decent Homes, said withdrawing from PFE would increase Oldham's housing target from 680 to 1,049 new homes per year as a result of the government's new housing targets. Councillor Taylor added, I do understand that people feel strongly about releasing Greenbelt land for development purposes, but if our housing numbers were to increase, we would have no option but to significantly expand the amount of Greenbelt land for development purposes. She added that Stockport has seen its annual housing targets nearly double, and it has conceded that Greenbelt land will need to be given up to meet the targets. Councillor Taylor said asking the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner, to remove Oldham from PFE would not be legally sound and would leave the council susceptible to judicial review. Leader of the council, Councillor Arud Shah, added that leaving PFE would lead to more building in places we don't want in the borough. Councillor Howard Sykes, leader of Oldham Liberal Democrats, which proposed the motion earlier this year, said, the report argues that to write a letter to the Secretary of State would be unlawful. Members should ask themselves, how can it be that making a request of a government minister should be considered unlawful? Because the report fails to tell us how. No legislation or legal precedent is cited. So let's be really clear. Without a proper legal explanation as to how and why it would be unlawful to write to the Secretary of State, the resolutions in this report amount to nothing more than an attempt to unduly influence elected members. Councillors voted in favour of making the formal request to the government by a majority of 30 to 29. Following the meeting, Councillor Sykes said Liberal Democrats have been against the destruction of our Greenbelt in pursuit of developer profit from day one. When Labour lost control of the council earlier this year, we promised the people of Oldham we would force another vote on this issue and lead the charge to pull out of this scheme in favour of a brownfield first strategy for truly affordable housing. That is what we have done. In response, a council spokesperson said, Places for Everyone is Greater Manchester's plan to ensure the right homes are being developed in the right places across the city region while safeguarding our valuable green spaces. However, the reality is that the level of housing need in Greater Manchester means there will inevitably be some limited encroachment onto our green belt. In Oldham, we successfully reduced this from 7.5% of our green belt to just 2.5% by maximising use of brownfield availability in the borough. Leaving PFE would be incredibly risky course of action for Oldham because it means our greenbelt land and other green spaces would no longer benefit from the protection that PFE provides, making it easier for developers to build on them. Therefore, officers recommended that we didn't write to the Prime Minister to ask her to consider a request to withdraw from PFE. At Wednesday night's full council meeting, this recommendation was rejected, and we are now considering next steps. First of all, in this article in the Oldham Times, the request to remove everyone from the Places for Everyone scheme, 4 times the article references that the vote meant that OMBC write to the government. Four times. And anyone who watched that council meeting will have seen for themselves exactly what they were voting for. Before I go on to a subsequent article, I want to debunk some of the double talk, lies, deception, whatever the term is you prefer to use. The first one is Elaine Taylor. Claims that withdrawing from Places for Everyone would increase targets from 680 homes to 1,049 homes. The government does have new targets. Now, if the government has new targets, and it's a new Labour government, by the way, because of its new housing targets, Places for Everyone would have to adopt those and incorporate the government's new targets. There is nothing legally, there is nothing that would mean that staying in Places for Everyone means that the government's quota for house building targets that Oldham is exempt from. Now, she doesn't say that, but that's what she's insinuating, isn't she? Councillor Elaine Taylor, Cabinet Member for Decent Homes, said withdrawing from PFE would increase Oldham's housing targets from 680 to 1,049 homes per year as a result of the government's new housing targets. Well, actually, staying in PFE would also increase housing targets from 680 to 1,049 new homes per year as a result of the government's new housing targets. These people think they're smart, and this is the sort of doublespeak they use. Two, but if our housing numbers were to increase, we would have no option but to significantly expand the amount of Greenbelt. development. Again, complete nonsense. It's complete and utter nonsense. And it's complete and utter nonsense because if you read what Howard Sykes later says, and I'll take it to the section. When Labour lost control of the council earlier this year, we promised the people of Oldham we would force another vote on this issue and lead the charge to pull out of this scheme in favour of a brownfield first strategy for truly affordable housing. So there's absolutely no need for us to build on the Greenbelt in any case when we've got so much brownfield land. And if our housing targets increase, which is set by government, not something we can escape, adopting an exclusive brownfield first scheme would mitigate any building on the Greenbelt. It's the Greenbelt, for crying out loud. There's a line in the sand. There's a reason why they designated Greenbelt. You can't dip into it when it suits you. And why are we dipping into it? Are we dipping into it to buy people from Holt's or Durker or Chadderton, support them into housing? No. It's to create an elite, exclusive, high council tax yielding income. It's got nothing to do with local housing targets. Never has done, never will do. Her next one. Stockport has seen its annual housing targets nearly double and it has conceded that Greenbelt land will need to be given up. Okay. Stockport has seen its annual housing targets nearly double because Stockport did a review of what its housing targets need to be for the people of Stockport. And Stockport's review determined that they needed more houses, smaller houses, whatever, more houses to meet the local need. Not houses with big gardens at the front, big gardens at the back or anything like that. More houses for starter families, more houses for people who are retired and want to downsize. It needs more houses than what Burnham's scheme originally wanted of Stockport. So what that is actually is an admission that the PFE scheme in Stockport was never going to meet the needs of Stockport. It's a good thing that they're building houses now of the type, the size and the value in the places that best meet the needs of the people of Stockport. How can this be a bad thing, Elaine Taylor? And as for your claim, it has conceded that Greenbelt land will need to be given up. Notice again how Elaine Taylor dodges the facts, infers. Well, Stockport was giving up Greenbelt space anyway for places for everyone. Is it giving up more Greenbelt space? Less Greenbelt space? And if it's giving up Greenbelt space, is it in the Greenbelt areas that the people of Stockport think that houses should be built on? Do you see the difference? Do you see how they twist and manipulate and people just accept it? I'll carry on. She claims it's not legally sound. What we found out, as in to write a letter, is not legally sound. And susceptible. Who is going to do a judicial review? Susceptible to judicial review. It'll be laughed at. A council writes a letter to the government and someone is spending tens of thousands of pounds reviewing the writing of that letter. Who would it be? The only person it could be is Andy Burnham. The only person who could do that is the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. There's no way they'd do that. And if they did, they wouldn't win. And Burnham would be laughed at for the rest of his political career. More so than he is now. Sorry, the Oldham Times page is playing games. And I agree with Councillor Howard Sykes. Members should ask themselves, how can it be that making a request to a government minister could be considered unlawful? Okay, so that's what came out immediately after they got themselves into a mess and all their plans unravelled. A few days later, in the Oldham Evening Chronicle, and I don't blame the Chronicle for this, by the way, it's just it's how it's published, the local democracy reporter, Charlotte Hall, another one of the metropolitan elite, began to try and spin a counter-narrative. But in a narrow defeat of 30-29, apparently we rejected the report. Well, the report wasn't rejected in isolation because the report forms one step of a motion that goes back to July. Councillor Sykes suggested that by rejecting the report, opposition leaders have forced the hand of senior leadership. He didn't suggest that at all. He stated that unequivocally. However, the local democracy reporting service understands that because of the double negative in the report, the council is not mandated to do anything, as the vote has only rejected the suggestion not to write to the Secretary of State. That's complete and utter nonsense. A separate motion requesting the letter to be written will have to be voted on in full council, according to a council spokesperson. Well, Charlotte Hall, who is this council spokesperson that is undermining democracy in Oldham? Because that council spokesperson would not have the authority to speak without, forget Arud Shah for one moment, without Shelley Kipling's approval, without Bogotov's approval. Do you see how bent this system gets? Who is your council spokesman? Drawn up over almost a decade of negotiations. I don't care. You could speak. You could have negotiate. You didn't negotiate with the people of the town. You negotiated amongst yourselves what you'd be doing to us. The PFE framework requires the borough to build 11,500 homes by 2037. Oldham, along with the rest of the country, is locked in a housing crisis. No, we're locked in a housing crisis isn't quite accurate, is it? There's far more going on in Oldham. Rents are rising more rapidly in the district than anywhere else in Greater Manchester. Maybe rents are rising more rapidly than anywhere else in Greater Manchester because rents were lower than anywhere else in Greater Manchester before. A council spokesperson argued. Well, who's a council spokesperson? Sacrificing a little bit to protect the rest may be unpalatable to some members, but doing away with that condition is actually putting the whole Greenbelt at risk. It doesn't make any sense. That's a complete lie, Elaine Taylor. That's a complete and utter lie. They are peddling the myth that if we don't sign up to places for everyone, then all of the Greenbelt is open to development. No, because it's Greenbelt. You can just say no to having houses built on the Greenbelt, particularly if you have a local plan? Why has Oldham not developed its own plan? The next full council meeting when a motion to reject the PFE scheme could be put forward will be on December the 18th. Again, that's a complete and utter lie from an inexperienced, inept, fake liberal. And yes, if you hear contempt in my voice, it's because I actually hold these young women in complete contempt. The likes of Charlotte Hall have never lived in Oldham, will never live in Oldham, and they look upon our people with complete and utter disdain. So they think they can change democracy. What they want is for it to go away until December. By that time, do something with Mincy Boy. Maybe try and bribe the Oldham group with the Pakistani Community Centre in Glodwick, have a second vote and win it. What needs to happen is that Howard Sykes needs to stand up, Mark Woodvine needs to stand up because it was Woodvine who seconded the original motion, and they need to write to the borough solicitor, they need to write to the mayor, copying in the borough solicitor, calling another extraordinary council meeting on this issue. They need to fight that the vote was final and not go with a second motion in December. And the only way they can fight for that is to call an extraordinary council meeting in the same way Lewis Quigg did over the dodgy appointment of, what's her name, Shelley Kipling, and Harry Caffrell being paid £40,000 a year to technically work 1 day a week in Oldham. Howard Sykes should have done it already. Max Woodvine should have done it already. Howard knows better. Max is a young lad, he won't know. Graham Sheldon, you've got no chance. He's not, he's risk adverse, isn't he? You've seen him. But Howard Sykes and the Lib Dems need to write to the mayor demanding, requesting an extraordinary council meeting. They need to fulfill the criteria to do that, which is, I think, 5 people writing to him. They've got more than 5 councillors between them and the Conservatives. They've got close to 20, and request an extraordinary council meeting. And if they don't, then I question whether this is just about playing politics. Because I know for you and for me, it isn't. These are our homes, these are our communities, these are the places where we were raised, where we raise our children, these are the places where we buried those we love. This is our home. So to us, this is not about playing politics. Howard Sykes, write to the mayor, call an extraordinary council meeting. And I guarantee you that that public gallery will be full of Greenbelt campaigners from Shaw, from Royton, from Lees, from across Saddleworth, from Chadderton, from across all communities in this borough, who can see what's going on, and also people who perhaps don't have an interest in the Greenbelt, but have an interest in protecting our democracy. My name is Raja Miah. This is one of those free-to-air Recusant 9 transmissions. I hope there are those listening who can and will act on this. I have no power. I'm not a politician. I don't sit in the council chamber. What I can do is educate members of the public from outside and lobby politicians and encourage them.
Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them.